Draft fans, Knicks fans, it's been a long time. I have delayed the start, but we're finally back, baby. It's Draft Strickland for 2025. Yes, we're still doing Draft Strickland, even though the Knicks don't have a first round draft pick. If you think that was going to stop Prez, you must not know how I do this. We're back nonetheless. Second round picks are cool too. And to help start us off this season, I have brought back a familiar guest who's helped start us off in the prior seasons. It's my guy Wilko. You may know him from his YouTube channel, Floor and Ceiling, which produces excellent videos on different draft prospects, mock drafts, things like that. You may know him from his Twitter account at WilkoMCV. You may know him now from these New York streets because he's doing a little something something covering that other team in Brooklyn for Sports Illustrated, but we will not hold it against him. Wilco, welcome back. How's it going?
Prez, my guy. Appreciate you having me on. Going well. Looking forward to talking a little bit about this draft class, which I think is a pretty exciting one, actually. Comparing it to last year's, and I think, even next year's as well, that's going to be important. But definitely, a pretty exciting class, and I still think a pretty, open-ended class as well as we kind of look ahead towards the next few months with the lottery, the combine, and then obviously the draft.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. This class has been, I think, for me personally, a little more difficult to evaluate the players, both against each other and then comparing them to other players from recent classes. So that's probably one of the reasons why I actually delayed Josh Strickland because I was like, I need people to help me make some fucking sense of this shit because there's some tough evaluations. But now with conference tournaments about to begin, we'll probably see the real prospects begin to separate a little bit from some guys who might have just had a hot start or something like that. So it'll be good to see. But I guess for people who haven't really seen this year's class, like I think the first thing that everybody, even if you don't pay attention to college hoops, even if you don't pay attention to draft stuff, the one guy who people know is Cooper Flag. And, he got off to like a relatively slow start by his standards. And some people were like, man, like this guy, he's like a wing, but he's not really, he doesn't got some kind of like cross between Hezzy package, and he's not really like breaking dudes down off the dribble like crazy. And he's really good, but like, is he a number one pick type, right? Like, he doesn't scream like run your offense or anything like that. And then as the year went on, he just kind of picked up steam and picked up steam and picked up steam. And then it's like, okay, like you blink twice and now he's like 30 usage and he's got like a gang of 25 plus point games and stuff like that. So like w- where like Cooper Flag, I think 99.9% people on the internet know that this young man from Duke, well, not from Duke, at Duke, from Maine, is gonna be the number one pick. But like, what do you make of him as a number one pick, like compared to some of the studs of previous years?
Yeah, the main event, right? So I really like Cooper, and I've always been really high on him ever since I started scouting him when he was like 14 or 15. So when it was time to get into this draft cycle, he was always my, very clear cut number one. And even, before the season started and all that, I always thought that it was going to take quite a bit for him to get dislodged out of that position by somebody else. But kind of like you said, he didn't have the greatest or the most dominant or flashy start to his freshman season. Um, Dylan Harper had a really, really good start, and I caught him live as well watching him play for Rutgers against Princeton, and he was really good in that game. Whereas like Cooper, kind of like what you were saying, he was putting up numbers and stuff, but he wasn't exactly just obliterating his competition or anything. I think everything just kind of changed a little bit right after he turned 18, and it's almost like a flip, just kind of switched at that point. He's been doing everything like you were saying, high usage, ball in his hands a lot, making a lot of decisions now, in the pick and roll, as a playmaker, in the post, out of the short roll as well, being asked to create his own offense in multiple ways. So I really think that with Cooper, we're looking at a pretty high level prospect. For me, my point of comparison has always been Zion Williamson in terms of hype, in terms of expectation, and also in terms of how the season has developed. I think it's easy now to kind of forget that going into his freshman season at Duke, Zion wasn't, some consensus number one pick. Um, you had RJ Barrett and Nasir Little as well, especially after both of them had done pretty well in sort
Oh,
of.
Knicks fans remember we had a lot riding on that draft.
So it wasn't, a surefire thing headed into the season, much like I think for Flag, it wasn't a 100% lock either. I think there was a little bit of a discussion about Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper, who I'm sure that we'll get into, but particularly, over the last 2 months and a half or so is when I would say that Cooper has genuinely just completely separated himself from the rest of the pack. And for me, he's in his own tier right now.
Yeah, and for people, I didn't mention it up top, but like it's worth repeating. He played a significant part of his season 17 years old, and then he turned 18. So this guy is freshly 18 and obliterating the competition. He has, if you look at his advanced metrics, he has a top 3 box plus minus in the nation. Usually that's the prospect of that's the realm of seniors and dominant 40-year players and stuff like that, like Zach Edey last year. He's right up there with those guys this year. He has the highest defensive box plus minus. I think what sets him apart to me is like usually with number one type picks, it's like, oh, clearly they could be the centerpiece of an offense, but you don't always, unless they're a center or something like that, they don't always feel like they're elite defensive prospects too. The last guy to kind of be like that, he wasn't actually the number one pick, but was kind of like Chet a little bit. But even Chet, like he played on a team with other ball handlers. His usage and scoring was secondary to who's that big old white dude who played like 8 years in college?
Drew Timmy,
My guy Drew Timmy. I forget. I think he's in
he's
Detroit's
with
G
the
League team.
he's with the Long Island Nets now. Actually, he
Oh,
just joined the team like 5, 10 games ago.
there you go, Drew Timmy, chopping it up in Long Island. But yeah, so like he was not the guy on offense, not even close on in college, despite being an amazing college player. Cooper Flag is the guy. He initiates the most offense for Duke. He has a gazillion pick and rolls, right? Even though he's a wing, he's the main scorer, the main rebounder, the best defender. He just like does it all, and that's a way where he's definitely similar to Zion when he was at Duke. I mean, Zion had famously RJ and Cam Reddish and Trey Jones and stuff like that, but uh, even though I'm pretty sure RJ took the most shots because RJ tends to do that, Zion was definitely the core of that offense, just like Coop is. So it's I think if you would have said that like 3 months ago, people would have been like, "What the hell, man? Like this guy don't feel like no Zion." But now it's like a little less crazy to suggest something like that. So
But
he's
also,
mhm,
let me just say another name as
yeah.
well to just kind of toss out there, which is something that I kind of started thinking a little bit about it, towards the end of his high school career. But now that he's really taken that much more of a primary role on ball, especially, I feel like Cooper really reminds me of Kawhi Leonard on both ends. And I think he still needs, more polish offensively, obviously, but just in terms of how he kind of gets to his spots and how he can, play in the pick and roll as a ball handler, also as a screener, can be a small ball five in the future, I'm sure. But, his best position will be at the wing. So Kawhi actually is a name that has really been coming to my mind when it comes to Cooper.
Yeah, man, high praise. Uh, they don't Cooper plays a lot has a lot more responsibility on offense than this guy ever had, but he reminds me a little bit of two of my favorite players back when I was in high school, if I want to date myself, which is Sean Marion and Andre Kirilenko. None of those guys were ever the first option on offense, but those guys dominated the game on defense and they were versatile. And that's cool to me. Coop is like that, but like you're alluding to, like turbocharged on offense. And his he started off shooting roughly, and now you look at his stats, it's like, oh, 38% from three, 39% on catch and shoots. Like all his shooting stats are kind of like aligning to what he wasn't like a bad shooting prospect by any means as a high school player. So people didn't expect him to come out shooting like 30% or some shit. So it took him a bit, but like you said, he turned 18. Something happened and he started kicking ass. You also mentioned the other two guys who have been in the conversations, albeit very briefly, for number one pick. The Rutgers boys in Jersey, the point guard Dylan Harper, and the wing Ace Bailey. For people who haven't seen them, they are putting Rutgers men's hoops on the map. Dylan Harper is a 6'6" point guard. Um, Pretty good at everything. He's all right. If he can improve as a shooter, but he's not a bad shooter. Um, he's not like a dunk contest athlete, but he's still like pretty athletic, particularly like stop and go and using his strength and coordination and stuff like that. I don't think anybody's gonna confuse him with John Morant, but like he's 6'6" and like not skinny. He's like just solid. And like it's just like impossible for anyone to really guard him one on one in college. And he's just is a beast in general. And then you have Ace Bailey, who is 6'10" with like one of the most beautiful looking jump shots ever and can jump when he has a runway. Sometimes doesn't look like he knows what he's doing out there, but like he hits the glass, always tries hard, good motor, and this jump shot that is just like God's gift. And he's 6'10", so nobody's bothering him anywhere on the court when he shoots. Um, and Ace, like you said, Dylan got off to a really hot start while Cooper got off to a slow start. So for some, if you go look at some mocks earlier in the year, some people had Dylan number one. Um, and then you had Ace making a little bit of noise, but he kind of got off to a slower start as well. But then later in the year, Dylan got sick, went down for a couple of weeks, and Ace finally started balling out in his own right. He had a couple of 30 something point games. So like uh, all three of these guys have gotten hot at the same time. Where do the Rutgers guys stand to you? Like I think most people have them in the top five or top three, but like how do they stack up for you compared to like top three-ish guy? We've seen a wide variety of top three picks the last couple of years, right? You got guys like Scoot who have crazy hype but got off to a rough start. You got real like one-way scorer types like Jalen Green, but who are really explosive when they get it hot. You got Chet, you got Paolo. Just there's a lot of top three picks lately can can look very different from class to class. So, like, compared to some of those guys I just named, do you think Harper and Bailey are, like, right up there or, like, just a little worse or a little better? Like, where are you at on them? How high are you?
So I'll just start with Ace because I feel like his player comparison is kind of straightforward, especially, like in recent drafts. I think like Brandon Miller would probably be a pretty good comparison for where Ace is at for me. I see him as like a top five guy right now. I know that, particularly a little bit earlier in the cycle when he was struggling, like with his efficiency and stuff, like some people even dropped him out of their top 10 altogether. I thought that was just way too drastic because his baseline as a player, for me at least, is something that I'm pretty comfortable with. Just, kind of what you were saying. He's 6'9, 6'10, can really shoot the ball out of, different spots, I would say. Like, I think that his shot selection can improve, but in theory, he should be able to drill movement shots and do some face up stuff and, like create his own shot out of two or three dribbles. So he should have, different kill spots around the floor while still being a good rebounder, which I actually think is sort of a slept on quality of his game right now. And when he's engaged on defense, I do think that Ace can make plays. It's just that he loses focus a lot and his engagement level can like really fluctuate. But besides that, like I am pretty comfortable right now with him as a top five pick and kind of thinking about him in that Brandon Miller sort of mold. As for Dylan, I think that maybe a guard prospect like De'Aaron Fox makes sense. Not somebody who's a perennial all star. That's a pretty competitive position in the NBA at the guard spot, but somebody who will be averaging, 20 plus points per game, play on high usage for their respective team. And I think that Dylan is having a fantastic freshman season for Rutgers. It's kind of easy to kind of forget about it with all the hype that Flag deservedly is getting. But Dylan has been really good. And if he hadn't had that, that flu, and if I'm not mistaken, he had a little bit of an injury that coincided with those games as well. But if he hadn't had that little bit, of a dip for those couple of games, I think that we would be looking at one of the best freshman season of the last few draft cycles. So for me right now, he's my number two on my big board. I think that he'll be a top three lock for me. I can't say that he's a top two lock for me just yet because of a couple of guys who I have right behind him. But I do expect that, if I had to place a bet on it right now, Dylan will go number two after Cooper Flag.
So that's really helpful. Last year, a lot was made of the top of the class being weak, right? Like, it's it's not that they're bums or anything like that, but we were coming fresh off of, like, Victor Wembanyama, right? Like, one of the best first picks you could possibly ever have, and even Scoot and Brandon Miller, who were incredible in their own right as prospects. Um, then the year before that, you got, like, Paolo and Chet and Jabari and these guys all. Jabari taking a little longer, but Paolo, immediately a pretty high scorer in the league, and Chet lost his rookie year, but immediately was clearly like one of the better young players in the NBA, part of a dominant team before he got hurt. Now he's back. And last year you have Risa Shea and Alex Sarr and Reed Shepard and the current front runner for rookie of the year, Steph Castle, because somebody has to win rookie of the year, right? And then like you got kind of a mix of other players who are again all solid guys like Holland and Klingon and Edie who are contributing to winning teams, as well as some other players. But no one who's like a franchise cornerstone or anything like that. So going back to like the top guys like Castle, Reed, Sar, Risa Shea, like in my head, Dylan and Coop clearly clear those guys, but like uh after Cooper Flag and Ace Bailey, I don't know who rounds out your top five, but I mean after Cooper Flag and Dylan Harper, like is Ace like a Risache Sar type player, or do you think he's better than those guys? Like where how does he compare to those guys to you?
I think that he's less of a certainty than Riza Shea or Sar, because like with both of those guys, I felt pretty comfortable projecting what their NBA role could be. Um, and also they were like versatile enough for me to be confident that like, if Risache was asked to just play out of spot ups and make decisions off of that to either, catch and go or catch and shoot or catch and pass, I thought that he could do that. But at the same time, like if he went to the Wizards or something like that, like I'm sure that he could have gotten some ball handling, reps in the same way that Bilal Koulibaly is getting right now. And like I would have felt fine about that. Or like with Alex Sarr, right now I think that he can kind of, toy around a little bit and just experiment with the Wizards. But if he'd gone to a different team that needed him to play a much more narrow role in the pick and roll, then like I'm sure he would have been able to do that too. With Ace, I don't know if like the buy-in is gonna be there to play what essentially I think could be considered an off-ball role in terms of just like moving around and like zipping around the floor and being asked to like play out of movement shots and like coming out of screens and stuff and out of cuts. Because I think when he does that, it limits a lot of his worst tendencies with his shot selection. And not just that, but even though I don't think that Ace is a selfish player, I think that he can be very single minded when it comes to scoring. So if the ball is in his hands, he's probably not going to be doing a great job of sharing it. Um, I'm not entirely sure what his season high for assists is right now, but I remember that like in January, the season high was 2 assists. So like he's not really going to swing the rock. And that's my main concern is going to be like when he gets to the NBA and when he's a rookie and maybe he has to be that fifth guy on the court who's just standing in the corner and kind of has to, base his role off of that. Um, I don't know how, he's really going to fulfill that or whether he's always going to be a guy who needs a lot of touches and who needs to get into like a weird rhythm of sorts where he takes a bunch of shots, even if they're not great shots. But I don't know. I think that Ace is one of the most fascinating evaluations in this class. And like, if he went number three, I wouldn't be surprised. But if he slid all the way to like number nine or number 10, I could completely understand that also.
There's a terrible, terrible timeline where a high variance, high upside player like Ace falls out of the top three, and the dumbass 76ers, because they suck, convey their pick to the Thunder. And then the fucking Thunder get Ace Bailey and then like make the most out of him. And I hate everything. And I just wish that this timeline never comes into existence, and if it does, I hope we can go back in time like the Avengers to change it, because like you said, he is a high ceiling prospect. His highlight tape is going to be fucking crazy by the end of the year.
Hmm.
He like the other day, like I was watching like he like reverse dunked on like Danny Wolf, another first round pick, and I was just like, Jesus, I didn't even know he could do that. And he's just like busting out new stuff every game. So he's definitely an intriguing and fascinating player. I think like so those guys are like sort of a consensus top three, and then you have like it's really a consensus top two, which you kind of alluded to, and then you have Ace and a couple of other players from like the 4, 5, 6, 7-ish range where it's like it depends who you're reading and who you're talking to. Um, some corners of the draft internet have Baylor's shooting guard VJ Edgecombe and Illinois combo guard Kasparas Jakusjonis from Lithuania. Both freshmen, both really, really talented. As like guys in their 4 or 5. Some other peeps got guys like Derek Queen, who's a monster scoring center, maybe power forward, who's like has 250 pounds but moves like a ballerina. Some people got the sophomore Colin Murray Boyles, who's like a monster South Carolina power forward sophomore. Trey Johnson, the shooting guard from Texas, is scoring like a gazillion points every game now and shooting like crazy. Some people have the big guy from Duke, Kaman Maluak. So like it gets really variable after that. So like we don't have to go through all of those guys, but like getting out of the like just taking a quick step back and like, okay, we've talked about some of the top three. As far as like a top 10 or even a lottery goes, like what's the kind of vibe to you? Like one way I kind of think about classes is like, thankfully the Knicks are good, but when I started doing this, the Knicks were not good. That's why I started doing this. And I'm like, how nervous would I be to pick in X part of the draft or Y part of the draft? So like you're picking 4 or 5, or to me, like in this draft, I'm picking 1, 2, or 3. I'm pretty cool. I'm picking 3, 4, 5, or 6. I'm like, this is good. This is good. A little anticlimactic, but this is good. I'm picking 7, 8, 9, 10. I actually feel a little better than picking like 3, 4, 5, 6 because I feel like there's slightly less on the line. So like, if you had to like go through like the top 14, like the lotto, not necessarily player by player, but like if you had to break it up into clumps, like how do you feel about the different kind of sections, just picking in the different sections if you were, you know, if you had some ping pong balls on the line here?
Yeah, so similar to you, I mean, number one, I'm geeked, obviously, because I'm picking Cooper Flag, so I'm feeling great. For two, same. Yeah, I feel good about that too. Then 3 to 5, or even like, ooh, maybe like 3 to 6, it gets pretty dicey, I
Yeah, for
think.
some people it could be like 3 to 10. So like whatever the group is for you, like
I feel like for me, my group right now that I'm looking at, I would say like 1 and 2 with Cooper and Dylan, with Cooper Flag and Dylan Harper. Right now are a lock, or although I would say that Dylan can move down maybe. Then 3 to 5 right now are the same tier for me, and I have VJ Edgecombe, Kaman Madwatch, and Ace Bailey in that tier. I'm pretty high on VJ. I'll just, very quickly get into him, but I think that like in a high end outcome, he could be like a Victor Oladipo type of guard, or even like a smaller Asar Thompson, sort of like super athlete, playmaker, do it all, superstar type. But like even in a lower end outcome, I think he could play a role similar to like Cason Wallace or a solid version of Keon Johnson. So he's someone that I'm pretty high on. And then with Malwatch, there are multiple reasons why I'm high on him. I think that like his floor is pretty safe with like Derek Lively, probably like a pretty good comparison. And it helps that they both come out of Duke, of course. But like even with roles, I feel like Common going to the Atlanta Hawks, just like theoretically with Trey Young, that would be a fit that's just like nearly identical in my eyes to when the Mavs with Luca drafted Derek Lively. So Maluach is someone that I'm really high on, finishing everything at the rim right now. Great athlete, like he's gonna be versatile in the pick and roll. He's gonna cover a bunch of ground all over the floor. I think like the question is whether he can expand his offense or not, because at other levels, like in the NBA Academy and in the Basketball Africa League. Obviously the context is a lot different, but he was able to face up a little bit and pass a little bit and, like handle and shoot. And like, I don't think he'll be, doing this in the NBA. He definitely doesn't need to, but, you know, sort of expanding just being a play finisher into maybe more of a Brooke Lopez sort of big would open up things a lot more. So that's my 2 to 5 range with Dylan, Edgecombe, Malwatch, and Ace. After that, 6 to 12, I'm still feeling pretty good, like you were saying. I might even feel better, sort of like what you were implying, than that 3 to 5 ish range, because the teams before me have made the tougher decisions now, and I can just sort of pick the bones. I have Derek Queen, Trey Johnson in that range, Yakuchonis, like you were saying, Murray Boyles as well. Although I think that for him, like, it might be a little bit more contextual than some guys because he's a bit more of a tweener than Derek Queen or like Trey Johnson. Like with Queen, I think there are questions over whether he's a 4 or a 5. And with Trey, maybe you could argue that like he could be a 3 instead of a 2. But yeah, with Murray Boyles, I really feel like he's gonna have to play as a small ball 5 on offense. And that doesn't mean that he's gonna be a small ball 5, everywhere on the floor. Like you can put another 5 next to him, but then that other 5 sort of needs to be able to stretch the floor to some extent. And the number of 5s that can do that in the NBA with real gravity is pretty limited. So I don't know where that kind of leaves him. But yeah, 6 to 12, I'm feeling good. Rounding that out with Liam McNeely and Con Knipple, 2 really good shooters who I think will be able to make decisions, off the catch. And then after that, just to kind of round out the top 20, I think that right there, like after the top 12, it gets very, very tricky because now you're dealing with some guys who are, returners from college. You have a couple of international prospects with Noah Song and Ben Saraf who play for Ulm in Germany. You even have Asa Newell and Jeremiah Fears. They're both freshmen with sort of different circumstances, but high usage, both of them. So I don't know. It's going to be pretty interesting. Like, I really think that for me right now, after number 6, it's pretty much wide open. And like, I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to answer these questions yet, other than just, digging through a bunch of tape and evaluating even, going back to high school and, international tape as well. Because I think that something really quick that I do want to touch on here, because I think it's very important for this draft and like going forward, just with the draft landscape in general, is how much the NCAA and the NBA both have changed. Because even in this draft, right, like if I'm looking at my top 15, Cooper Flag, like we were saying at the top of the show, he was a 17-year-old freshman to start the season. He reclassified. He's going to be super young as a rookie. Then, we have Malwatch. He's coming out of a, little bit of a less traditional pathway out of the NBA Academy in Africa. Played in the Basketball Africa League as well, like I was saying. Then Yakuchonis as well, and Yegor Demin, who we didn't get into, but who I still think can be a lottery pick. Both of those guys are coming from abroad. Both of those guys are coming from Real Madrid and Barcelona. So that's an entirely different system to what's going on in college, in America. And then even with Jeremiah Fears, he's another, reclassify. Nolan Traore, who at the start of the year was, a top 10 consensus pick, I think he's sort of fallen off by the wayside. But he's another guy, who's a teenager and he's a pro in France. So just the context across the board that we're seeing before guys get to the NBA And then even when guys get to the NBA, right, like Reed Shepherd, he's barely played. So it's very, very competitive now, like maybe more than ever. And I think that this is something that we have to really just be conscientious of when we do these evaluations.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Something I've thought a lot about in recent years is like the idea that like once a player comes to the NBA, that they need reps to develop, and how true is that statement? And I'm when I say reps, I mean like reps with an NBA team and NBA minutes that are not like Tibbs putting in Pacom Daddier when we're up 40 with 2 minutes left or something like that, as opposed to playing in the G League. And with so many teams competitive and less teams tanking, there's way less minutes to go around. And then you add on top of that, so like, okay, the NBA has less minutes for young players to play and theoretically develop. And then on top of that, that's some reason to stay in college a little extra until you're sure. Like maybe you're really good as a freshman, but you're like, fuck, like I need to be sure I'm gonna get minutes in the NBA and I need to get better. I'm too raw right now to be considered a top five pick or something like that. So you go back for a second year. On top of that, you got NIL money that is super legit. I gotta imagine Cooper Flag is making like at least 5 million off that shit. So like, and it goes down the line, right? Like obviously not every player is making millions of dollars, but a lot of players are making a lot of money, and it's a sure thing and not a theoretical thing. So you can always just say, let me play it safe and make my family several hundred thousands of dollars, while I can, just to be sure, and then I'll enter the draft next year or something like that when I'm better. So there's a little bit more incentives for players to stay in college. And what that means for the draft is like you might get some years that have more strong upper class representation, like last year. You might get some classes where the guys who do declare tend to skew a little bit younger because they're young, but they know they're the shit, like Cooper Flag or Maluach or guys like that. So it's definitely changing the landscape. One question, speaking of the landscape of the draft, that I wanted to touch on. To me, last year's draft, the 2024 draft, the coolest thing about it was like, even though it was a little weak at the top with Risachet and Sar and Shepard, I felt like once you got past like the top five, like everybody's mocks were different. And I felt confident that just looking at how different mocks were and then looking at how the actual draft shook out, there was talent scattered throughout the draft. Like I mean, I miss as many draft projections as anybody, but like there were guys who I had first round grades on who went in the top 10, who went from 10 to 20, and who went from 20 to 30, and guys who I had first round grades on who went from 30 to 40 and 40 to 50, like Jalen Wells, 39th pick, right? Like starting shooting guard for the Memphis Grizzlies for most of the year. AJ Mitchell, 38th. I loved him. Played playing real minutes for the Thunder. And it just kind of goes down the line. Quentin Post, right? Like all these random dudes who are just, I shouldn't even say random. Ariel Hugporty, our son who just got hurt yesterday versus fucking Philly, of course, out for a couple of weeks. Like there's guys who are talented throughout. I was like, damn, this draft is, it seems deep with talent. And early on, after 1 year, it seems like that was a correct kind of analysis. For this year coming up, I feel like the top might be a little better than last year, but I feel like it's not quite as deep. But I'm also very behind compared to people who have been scouting a lot of these players since high school and before they transferred schools or whatever. I'm just perpetually like behind schedule on my scouting. So like as far as depth goes, like just thinking outside of the top 10 and the lotto, like how are you feeling about this class early on?
Yeah, I think you're pretty spot on, honestly. Like, I'm not feeling that confident in the depth of this class right now, just because I'm looking at my board right now, and a lot of my first round are freshmen who I think I still have plenty of questions about when it comes to their NBA projection and just sort of like short-term future. Cause just I'll say a few names right now, but like Jace Richardson, um, he's a guy who's gonna been getting a lot of buzz lately, and
For
he
people who
reminds
haven't seen him, Jace is a combo guard at Michigan State who is the son of Jason Richardson.
and he reminds me of Jared McCain a little bit, just because he can shoot the ball from deep and he's very efficient. And like I actually think that his efficiency really is sort of what defines his game as a scorer and as a playmaker. Like he barely turns the ball over, but at the same time, like a big part of his efficiency is just because until very recently, like his volume and his usage was so low. And when he gets into the NBA, he's going to need to make more decisions. So I don't even know if he would be better served returning to college for another year and being used in a more focal role before trying to get to the NBA. It seems now like his stock is gonna, improve enough to the point where he's gonna be a first rounder, and at that point, like I feel like if you're a freshman, you should probably stay in the draft no matter what and guarantee your NBA money. But he's an interesting case, or like Will Riley as well for Illinois. He's a lanky, like long, in my opinion, he's a shooting guard. I could see him being a three as well. But pretty similar questions when it comes to like, he's an interesting shot maker and like his positional size is great. But again, like his consistency hasn't really been there. And like his body just is not up to par when it comes to the NBA. So even though he is a first round talent, once again, you're kind of wondering, well, maybe he'd be better off, returning to college, or Carter Bryant from Arizona, who's kind of starting to break out now a little bit. I kind of see him as those, front court connector types who's athletic, does a little bit of everything, shoots the three as well. But I don't know, like, does he return? Does he declare for the draft? LeBaron Philon, another guy who's a freshman guard, combo from Alabama, really good decision maker, versatile, when it comes to playing on and off ball as a guard, but he has real questions about his three-pointer, about his finishing at the rim, and like if you're a guard in the NBA, neither of those areas could be shaky. So it's going to be interesting to see who stays in the draft, who comes back, who doesn't, because I think once we know that, it's really going to shape up, my decision on whether this draft class is truly deep or not. Right now, I would say that the first round has a lot of question marks for me. The second round looks a little bit deeper. There's a few older college guys right now who stand out to me. I don't know if you've gotten the chance to look at any of these guys. I'll just name three of them who I think could contribute, in the short term for their teams. But the first guy is Ryan Kalkbrenner, who's a big man out of Creighton. And he's pretty steady, has produced, throughout his entire college career. He can block shots. He's not super mobile or anything, but he can hold his own on defense and like he'll rebound and stuff and he'll move the ball smartly. Then Maxime Reynaud, who's a French forward, I would say. I don't think he's a big. He kind of reminds me of Kelly Olynyk or Quentin Post. Actually, he's sort of a name that reminds me of that. Does a lot for Stanford right now. He's like a 7-footer, shoots threes, passes the ball, posts up, runs the break sometimes. But once he's in the NBA, he'll scale down, and I think he'll be more efficient once he does less. And then the last name that stands out to me is Darian Williams from Texas Tech. Reminds me a bit of Kevin McCullough, that mold of player. Even Dylan Jones, if we want to take it back to last year's draft. So, sort of not super athletic, more strength based and ground based than very bouncy or anything, but makes a lot of decisions with the ball in his hands, posts up, uses his big body, and I think that if he stays in the draft, he can be of help to an NBA team as a rookie.
Those are definitely some names that I've heard of, but haven't really gotten into. So I'm gonna keep an eye out. Which brings me to the it's like a perfect segue. We didn't even script this, y'all. He just brought that shit up on his own. But like this is the last thing I wanted to talk about. So the Knicks currently have a pick in the 50s, and maybe they end up not picking at all, right? Like they're paying a lot of guys a lot of money, so they have to be very careful. Um, I suspect that they will end up making at least one second round draft pick. I don't think they'll make a first round draft pick because those guys get paid too much and they are operating on a razor thin edge here with the new CBA and the amount of money that they're going to have to pay guys, even like random bench players and stuff like that. So, but at the same time, as we see from the Knicks this season, like they need some flyers really at the end of the bench. They did it last year to some extent. They had 4 draft picks, which I didn't expect. Some of that was just to get guys who I'm sure eventually will be traded, right? To just have tradable salaries. Some of that was depth plays, right? Like Sims is gone, and now Hook Porty can be the backup. Obviously, he just got hurt. Guys like Kolek are just and Dadier are kind of there, like as the backups to the backups, and they're not going to play much, but Dadier especially is a long term upside play. So there's different things they could do even with the second round pick, and what I'm looking at as far as second rounders go for this Knicks team, without having gone deep into many of the second round level players, I'm like, okay, we got Towns. For now, at least, we have Mitchell Robinson. Maybe that'll change this summer. We have Huck Porty. That's 3 solid bigs. And then obviously at the guard spot, we have Brunson, and then we just drafted Tyler Kolek last year, who has not played, but I'm assuming they didn't draft him to tell jokes in the locker room. So maybe long term, he's a guy they consider a quality backup point guard, right? He's older, he's more ready to play in theory. Um, they still got Campaign, the lefty wonder. And so to me, I'm like, the odds are pretty good that they're going to take a second round pick who's not a center and who's not a point guard. Everything else, probably fair game. Any kind of wing, any kind of combo guard. I know a lot of people focus on the lack of Knicks big wing depth, and that's a good thing to focus on because we don't have that many of them. But you can't really be picky in the second round. If you got somebody who's a 2 or a 3 or a 4 and you think they're good and they're available, you should probably go get them. And especially with how the Knicks tend to move in the draft, which is like they always perpetually try to just like do a zillion trades and pull second round picks from other teams' pockets out of thin air. So, can you give me, with all that being said, I know you named a couple of guys already. Any do any players come to mind? Maybe 2 or 3 who you're like they seem like they could be in the second round, maybe the middle or the end of the second round. Although I know like the entire order of the round is who the hell knows what it's going to be at this point. But players who are second rounders who are not centers or point guards who you're like, I think people are sleeping on them. That might be a quality NBA player waiting in the wings there.
I'll give you three big wings who I think um, I'm higher on than the consensus right now. So the first guy is Dalen Swain. He plays for Xavier, and his offense is a little bit rough right now. He'll have a lot of inconsistent nights, but he looks like one hell of a defender, NBA athlete for sure. he's someone who I'm pretty high on, and like I would definitely pick him in the middle of the second round. He might be better off, returning to college for another year, but I'm pretty high on him. Um, Somebody else who I think is a real sleeper, and I have no idea if he'll declare for this draft, if he even like wants to make the NBA or not, or like if he'll just transfer to a bigger school. But this guy, I think that it's only a matter of time until he becomes a big favorite for like the stats community, if you will. He's a sophomore out of Robert Morris, and that's Alvaro Folguedas. He's from Spain, and he's a big wing, like 6'9", reminds me of Santi Aldama, can shoot the three, can attack closeouts, can play as a five even. So I'm very high on him. I don't really see him on any draft boards for the most part.
I was gonna say I just had to Google him because I'd never even heard of him. Robert Morris, so he's a sophomore.
Yeah, he's a sophomore, and like he just came over to the U.S. Pretty recently. He played for DME Academy in Florida for for high school ball, and then he didn't really like do much as a freshman for Robert Morris. He kind of like actually got on my radar at first, like not even through college, just because like he did some stuff that I thought was interesting with the Spanish youth teams in FIBA action over the summer. So that's kind of how he got on my radar. And then he's been having a really good sophomore season. So like I think that if he wants to pursue the NBA in the future, the means are there for him to do that. And like he's been having such a good season right now that he should, in my opinion, at the very least, like test the waters and like declare for the draft and go to the draft combine and all that stuff and kind of see what goes on. Um, and then my third name, he's I see him as a three. I think he can play the four. He's been playing the four a little bit in Australia. I think in the NBA he's gonna be a three. That's Alex Tui from the Sydney Kings. He's a wing that, in my opinion, his swing skill is just going to be, getting consistent from the 3-point line and really being sure that he's shooting in the mid 30s from there. I'm not sure what his, exact percentage is right now this season, but a few weeks ago it was under 30%, and that's what it was last year as well. But like I do think that he should be able to shoot the ball, and like he can make decisions off the catch and put the ball on the floor a little bit. And he's big and strong, and like NBA athleticism and speed in particular will be a little bit challenging for him compared to what he's used to in Australia. But like he's a really good defender in my opinion, and like you'll see him switch onto point guards in Australia. And sure, like if he does that in the NBA, he'll probably get scored on quite often. But even if he's just defending wings and checking guards from time to time, that will be useful. And then like he should have enough juice on offense if the 3-pointer is going in. So yeah, those three guys, Tui, Swain, and Folgatas, those are three sleepers who I'm pretty high on. And then one very last guy who I'll mention, just because he plays in the New York area, and since you touched on Pacom Daddier earlier, Donnie Freeman, I think that he'll be a one and done, even though he didn't have a good freshman season at Syracuse. And like, if he declares for the draft, I think he'll be there in the second round. And like, he's an upside swing for sure. So, someone in the Daddier mold who's a big wing, who's a three, a four, reminds me a little bit of like Kai Jones actually when he was at Texas. Yeah, Donnie Freeman, somebody else who I could see the Knicks going for.
All right, you heard it. Those are I've heard of half of those guys, so I'm gonna have to check out Donnie Freeman and Alvaro Folgueras. That guy has some crazy stats. I was pulling it up while you were speaking. So I'm definitely gonna check the film on him. Not that I know anything about Robert Morris, but I'm about to learn. because this guy seems like a real hooper. So, okay, cool. So we have gone through the top of the draft, the back of the draft, and we went really fast through some of the middle of the draft, but we'll get into more of the middle of the draft and the middle of the first round specifically in the next couple of episodes. But hopefully, listeners, you got a nice little overview from Wilko and me about how this draft is shaping up, how it compares to prior years. Um, we're still going to do our thing, draft Strickland, plus a couple of articles here and there as conference tournament season and March Madness gets underway. So if the Knicks got you down because they can't beat Cleveland or the Thunder or Boston, just watch some college hoops. That's what I do to cope. On that note, Wilko, thank you for joining us again. Do you want to remind folks where they can find you, and if there's anything you want to plug, feel free to just go ahead and plug it.
Yes, sir. Let me get my plug in real quick while this garbage truck doesn't make too much noise in the background. Um, at Wilko MCV on Twitter, on Blue Sky as well. At Floor and Ceiling on YouTube, on Substack, on TikTok. And yeah, stay tuned, guys. I just put out a video earlier this week with my Derek Queen scouting report. I also posted a film breakdown about Hugo Gonzalez, the Spanish wing who plays for Real Madrid. And I'll have another scouting report out later this weekend. I'm not sure when this podcast will be going up, but later this weekend, as in the first few days of March, I'll have a video out about Con Knipple from Duke, who, like we touched on a little bit, is going to be right around that lottery range. So, yeah, guys, make sure to check all of that out. And Prez, I appreciate you having me on, man.
All right, y'all. You heard him. Throw him a follow, subscribe on YouTube. It's your boy Prez. We'll be back in a week or two with the second episode of 2025's Draft Strickland. So stay tuned for that. And on that note, peace.